Hello, I'm with Archbishop Charles Chaput today to talk a little bit about Pope John Paul II's Theology of the Body. Thank you very much, Archbishop, for taking the time to speak with me today.
I'm happy to be with you, Damien. Thank you.
Archbishop, I'd like to just start by talking about your exposure to and involvement with the theology of the body in the United States and how you perceive it as being affecting the church in America. What kind of effect do you see?
You know, as I look back historically, I do remember when the Holy Father was giving his catechesis on the theology of the body, but I had no idea at the time that it would impact the church as it has. I think the first time I began to realize how significant this might be to kind of rebuild the church, and among the young especially, was when Christopher West, who became very much involved in the theology of the body, first came to work in Denver. He was the director of family life for the Archdiocese, and he talked about it with great enthusiasm, and of course his enthusiasm is contagious, and the truth of it, of course, is very, very contagious and exciting. So that's my memory of how I began to become aware of how this might impact the church.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Christopher West. You have written the foreword to Christopher West's book called The Good News About Sex and Marriage, which is a fantastic Q&A session on the practical aspects of the theology of the body. Mm-hmm. In that, you have written that the theology of the body is not a theoretical work, but it's a source of practical nourishment because it continually shows that dealing honestly with the issues of sexuality and marriage brings us face to face with the whole gospel message and the meaning of our lives. So there's an awful lot contained in that short blurb.
Yes. You know, our bodies are rather immediately demanding on us in all kinds of ways that our minds aren't. And so I think any part of our Christian reflection that deals with our body is in some sense more immediately attractive to people because we all have questions. I mean, it isn't just about human sexuality, it's about getting old, about not being healthy, or about being healthy. So I think that the interpenetration of body and spirit that human beings are is both parts of who we are an important part of our theological reflection. Mm-hmm. And it captures the attention and imagination, especially of young people.
Yes. You've noticed that in your own church, that it's beginning to rejuvenate the church in that sense, reaching out to young people, getting them more engaged with the gospel message, making it maybe more relevant to their lives?
I don't know that there's any one issue that young people have told me that they want to evangelize about as much as the theology of the body. Mm-hmm. And any number of young women and men want to give courses on it after having received instruction themselves. And so that kind of evangelical enthusiasm is pretty astonishing. Mm. So it's just immediately noticeable how important this is to people.
It seems to be something of the nature of Pope John Paul II and his immense draw that he had for young people. Yes. I remember hearing George Weigel talk about this, and he said he was asking the Pope, well, why is there such a draw to you? You're an old man, they're young. What's the draw? And Pope John Paul II simply answered, it's the Holy Spirit. And this seems to be something of the overflow of the Holy Spirit through Pope John Paul II with the legacy of this teaching that's still reaching out to the young people in the church and drawing them in and captivating them, as he did.
And I think his interpreters, and Christopher West is one example of that, but there are many, have made it even more accessible because the Holy Father's writing is rather dense. Mm-hmm. All of his writing is, actually. But it's rich, and the richness has been mined by people like yourself who've decided to make it more accessible by becoming evangelists, the young evangelizing the young, which is so very important.
Absolutely. The vocations crisis is often spoken about in the church today, and it's often spoken about in terms of religious life, the shortfall in priests and religious. But again, in your foreword to this book, you've touched on a greater vocations crisis as you see it, and that's to do with marriage and the family. Can you talk a little bit about that and something of how the theology of the body might have an impact on maybe resolving or meeting that crisis?
Right. You know, oftentimes people say to me, Bishop, what are you going to do about vocations? As though this is my responsibility. And there's very little I can do. I can encourage people to think about becoming a religious or priests, but I don't have any children. And the real cause of the vocations crisis, if we mean by that the diminishing number of people choosing church vocations for their way of life, it's really the responsibility of families. And one of the great contributions that the theology of the body can give towards overcoming this crisis is to help people understand the significance of marriage, and that marriage is the foundational vocation in the church, because it's from marriage that family life comes, and families that are healthy and whole, even though we're all sinful, are really the places where vocations are nurtured more than anywhere else. So yes, that's the vocation crisis, people understanding the dignity of marriage and the significance of children and the dimension that procreation plays in who we are as human beings. And so much of that has been lost in contemporary culture.
Absolutely. And I think there's something of a fear of commitment that's crept into our world, particularly young people today.
A whole lot of fear of commitment. And back when I was your age, which is a long time ago, people generally knew what they were going to do when they were 18, 20 years old. Now people postpone making decisions. There's so many options. And of course the big decision they postpone is the decision to get married. Because they don't understand that it's not just something that they might choose to do later on, but it's a vocation.
Yeah.
And if you have a vocation, it's important to get busy about that vocation as soon as reasonably possible, and to discern how to live that out faithfully.
And that's something I think that is drawn out in the richness of the theology of the body, is the married vocation, the celibate vocation, and the complementarity of it, and the beautiful call that is there for each of us to discern and to choose, but not to go into endless discernment.
Right.
Speaking of evangelization and reaching out to young people in the church and the church as a whole, Pope John Paul II obviously spoke many times of the desire that he had for a new evangelization. How do you see the theology of the body fitting in with his desire and his call for new evangelization?
Well, when the Holy Father spoke about the new evangelization, he said very clearly that the newness isn't in the content. The gospel is something we should be faithful to without exception in all its detail. And Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. But the new evangelization is different in terms of the instruments that we use, modern technology and communication. But I think the two things are very important. One is that the first evangelizations were done to a great extent by religious and by priests. The new evangelization, the primary actors in that are going to be people like yourself, the laity. And another dimension of the older evangelization was from the old to the young. And now, in so many situations, it's the young who are evangelizing the old, children evangelizing their parents, younger priests evangelizing older priests, priests evangelizing bishops.
Yeah.
And I think that the theology of the body, since it in some sense has captured the imagination of the young, it gives them an extraordinary energy to begin that evangelization of the church.
Yeah. Great. And obviously the theology of the body is a teaching that originated in Europe, but it's more widely known, or it's maybe more popularized in the US at the moment.
See, I didn't know that. That's something.
Yeah, well, that's something we've discovered here from our own experience and relating to different European developments of the theology of the body, but it seems to be much more of a groundswell amongst the church in America than there is here so far. Would you have any suggestions for how the theology of the body might be promoted based on your own experience in the US, how it might be translated to a greater exposure throughout Europe, maybe?
Well, again, my experience is that it's more immediately captivating of young people. So I think to make sure that you get the right number of young people involved in this, so that it can become a seed for fertilizing the rest of your country and the rest of Europe.